All right, guys. So today we're going to talk about content control. We're going to talk about censorship and a variety of different topics related to how we should approach issues of censorship and content control. So right now we're going to talk a little bit about automated content controls, particularly for children. So should the government impose the kind of central controls embodied in legislation such as the Communications Decency Act or COPPA, Children's Online Protection? Or should the internet be managed and controlled primarily through code? So the question really is, should there be legislation, right, that controls or monitors what children are exposed to, or should that be done through code? Should we have software that prevents certain people from accessing, where you have to put your little license on there and say, hey, look, I'm over 18 or I'm over 21 in order to access this particular thing. So should we legislate over content or give it over to code? So that is the real question. I want you guys to kind of talk about that. You know, just if you want, you can even mention it in, whatever. You can email any of your people in the class if you want to talk about it, but ultimately just kind of think about that for a second. Should we legislate control over content or give it over to code? So thanks to the rulings of the CDA and COPPA, the burden of content control has shifted to parents and local organizations like schools and libraries. But the exercise of this bottom-up exertion of power has caused some anxiety due to the potential for abuse. So ultimately, another issue that comes up is how should we monitor what children see? And if we're not doing it through code or through legislation, is it the responsibility of the parents? Or should it be kind of a bottom-up exertion of power? And should it be through schools and libraries? Right? Kids are oftentimes online in those areas. Should the schools and libraries be responsible for that? Or should it be both, right? So should it be both the schools and libraries and the parents? Obviously, probably a sensible response to that would be yes. I think it would probably be both. There are two broad areas of concern about the use of content controls that need elaboration. The first area involves the social and moral probity of censorship itself, even when it's directed at the young. There's a growing tendency to recognize a broad spectrum of rights, even for children. So one aspect of this is, do children have a right to access certain content for education or whatever? Or is it too dangerous to allow children to have access to this content because they might be exposed to content that is just above and beyond, their capabilities, children to absorb and to understand and to process? So that's a really good question. Ultimately, how we should approach this is looking at, is this content going to be destructive or harmful to children? But is there some information that children should have access to that's not going to harm them as children? So ultimately, it's kind of a practical issue. All right, let's move on to, we'll talk about hate speech. So monitoring what children see is one thing, but another thing that we have to think about when we're talking about censorship is hate speech. So preventing children from seeing things, that's one thing, but when we are confronted with questions about what people can and can't say with respects to censorship, can they say this, can they not say this? How should we censor, or should we not censor at all? So the rapid expansion of hate or extremist speech on the web raises similar polemical disputes. Many groups, such as white supremacists and anarchists, which it's weird they put those two in the same category because anarchists aren't necessarily harmful, but white supremacists clearly are. Some of these sites are blatantly anti-Semitic. They disparage the Jewish religion or make preposterous claims that the Holocaust never happened. Other sites take aim at religions like Islam. On occasion, these sites can be especially virulent and outrageous, such as websites as Charlemagne Hammerskins. One scene reveals a man disguised in hockey mask, bearing a gun, and standing next to a swastika. While social media is an ideal space for grassroots movements, BLM of the Tea Party can also serve as a platform for individuals and groups to spew their hate about others, particularly against those of distinct ethnicities, religions, genders, and gender identities, sexual orientation, age, and disability. So while the internet is a great place to connect with others, it's a great place to have really deep, fruitful discussions, it's also a place where one can experience a lot of hate, and they can experience a lot of discrimination based on various categories that they might fall in, like ethnicities, religions, gender identity, sexual orientation, age, disability, and likewise. So while it is a great place to discuss, debate, and have some really good conversations and interactions, it can also be a place where we have some situations like that. Some authors have adopted the metaphor of the internet as extra spatial, support their view that it cannot be regulated by territorial laws, which after all are made for real spaces. If therefore cyberspace is separated from reality, then one can say anything and should be regarded as not real. So some advocates of this idea of extra spatial suggest that the internet is really not a real place and it's separate from reality. Therefore, the things that people say and discuss on it shouldn't be taken serious. So kind of think about this for yourself. Do you agree with the position that hate speech is irrelevant since it takes place in cyberspace, which is considered by some as not as real as the physical world? Now, obviously, some of you, I would say most of you, probably won't agree with that. And we'll see that the internet is still a place where certain rights need to be protected and that people can be hurt, can be treated poorly, right? It's not a place where it's all sort of outside of the realm of reality. It is a reality in and of itself. So we can also see some promotion of terrorism and terroristic threats in the world of cyberspace. Consider that some hate speech is linked with promotion of terrorism. Now, in this respect, when we go past just simply mocking an individual or making fun of a person, now we're talking about actually encouraging physical attacks against other people. Right? So there are times when there are people or groups that are promoting physical violence and terroristic action against certain groups or certain for the spec of certain persons. So there's protection, but some of this protection recently affirmed by the U.S. Supreme Court, which decided that the graphic hate speech by Westboro Baptist at military funerals was protected by the First Amendment. So while there are some hate speech which is terroristic and encouraging people to do violence, there is some that's protected under the Constitution that even though the hate speech sounds insightful, it's just simply expressing an opinion, even if that opinion is horrible and horrific and really is difficult for some people to deal with. All right, so that's hate speech, right? So we got hate speech. Now, censorship. So we went from protecting children, we talking about how we should address hate speech. Another issue is anonymous speech. How do we deal with people that are on the internet that we don't even know who they are? Their faces are behind masks. They don't have any identifying characteristic or identifying information, so we don't even know who they are. So there's some pros and cons of that. We'll kind of go over that real quick about anonymous speech. So anonymous communication in cyberspace is enabled largely through the use of anonymous remailers, which strip off the identifying information of an email message and substitute an anonymous code or a random number. By encrypting a message and then routing that message through a series of these remailers, a user can rest assured that his or her message will remain anonymous. This process is known as chain remailing. Now, new anonymizer tools such as Tor have also emerged thanks to the work of a group of open source engineers. Tor is known as Onion Router because it is layers. It has layers of internet traffic like an onion. Tor's Proton Mail enables anonymous email communications, while the Tor browser isolates websites from the snooping gaze of advertisers or other third parties. So obviously, many of you may have used Tor, like Tor Onion. Tor Onion works as a layering process where advertisers, people that are trying to surveil you find difficulty in doing that. They can't really get any information about you as a user, and it's not able to target you with advertising or with, just kind of figuring out where you're at and what you're doing on the internet. So should digital anonymity be promoted, encouraged, since it is sometimes abused as a shield for subversive activities? And that's something you can kind of think about for yourself. It's a good question. Obviously, there's some good reasons to be anonymous online, because if you're addressing some abuse by maybe a large company or corporation or a government, there might be reasons to be anonymous online so that you aren't getting any of the negative consequences of revealing or whistleblowing some sort of really negative and destructive behaviors of an organization or a country, so that you aren't in trouble for revealing these facts. It would be difficult to argue convincingly that anonymity is a core human good, utterly indispensable. However, although anonymity may not be a primarily basic human good, it is surely an instrumental good or value. As I was saying before, it's really good because it will help you or prevent you from being exposed if you are whistleblowing on an agency or an individual or some sort of or a state that might try to hurt you or do something to you for bringing out this information. So the benefit of anonymity, the value of freedom, is constrained by some, and this is not a good thing. So can you think of a time when you were anonymous online? Can you think of situations where it's appropriate to do so? So kind of think about that for a second. Do you think that there are appropriate times that you should be anonymous? And obviously, exposing or whistleblowing against an organization or an entity would be a time where it's important. However, it can be abused. Anonymity can be abused so that somebody could use their mask or their anonymity to hurt other people without impunity, without receiving any of the negative consequences for doing that. So that's a real problem. All right, we'll move on to government censorship, and we'll wrap it up with a little bit going deep into various aspects of censorship. So, protecting children is one thing, hate speech is another thing. Anonymity obviously can be good and it can be bad, but ultimately there are governments which will find censorship as being something that is necessary. Many totalitarian governments will seek to censor dissent or criticism of those countries. Government censorship is not always confined to pornographic speech or harmful to minors or violent video games, because we find authoritarian governments also have sought to censor political speech by stifling dissent in their countries. And these websites and many foreign news sources are blocked by sophisticated filtering systems, specifically in China. So we see situations where there are countries like China, and you probably find North Korea and many others, where content is going to be censored. Some authoritarian governments have also sought to censor political speech by stifling dissent in their countries. Dissident websites and many foreign news sources are blocked by these filtering systems. Now, the censorship infrastructure has become known as the Great Firewall of China. Now, they censor in a variety of different ways, and we're going to talk about 3 ways in which they censor. Now, the first way they censor is through fear. Now, fear is a way of censoring any sort of dissent or criticism online by simply fear. If you criticize our government, or if you are accessing materials that we find offensive or find going against what the narrative of our country says, then we will imprison you or maybe even kill you, whatever. So there's fear. That's one way. Fear originates not only from consequences flouting China's censorship laws, but also from intimidation. So the fear is any type of way of preventing people from accessing material. Another one is called friction. Now, friction is just simply censoring directly content. so that you can't access. It's blocking a lot of these access to, like, say, for example, Facebook, or to Twitter X, or to any of these sites that certain countries, like China, for example, find that it's something that you should not access. Right? So you have fear, and then you have friction. Now the third one is flooding. So flooding is basically where a country or whatever, will flood the information that you have available online with other forms of information that support their narrative. So example, when you go to Google and you're looking up something about Tiananmen Square, you're going to have a bunch of websites that are going to be presented which give a counter narrative to what you're looking for. And it's going to give the narrative that is supported by the state. They flood they flood basically the search engine results so that you get a false narrative of what really happened, and you get a narrative that is conducive to what that country wants you to hear. So which one of these three mechanisms do you think is the most effective and the most dangerous? Is it fear, where you're just simply afraid to post or to access particular content? Do you find it's friction, where it's just simply blocked? Is that the most effective? Or do you think it's flooding, where you are inundated with all sorts of alternative views when you're searching for something that you really don't see the actual view? It's not really blocked, it's just inundated with other alternative sources. So which one do you think is the most effective and maybe even the most dangerous? So government censorship is another aspect of censorship that we see. Now, moving to social media. As many of you probably have social media websites. Facebook posts and threats. So how should we address many of the threats we see on social media? Is censorship something that's really important? Offensive and threatening language has become all too common in the infosphere, especially in interactive social media. In the United States, the right to free expression protected by the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution is quite broad. However, that right to free expression does not include the right to make a hostile threat directed at another person. A true threat is illegal even in the freewheeling realm of cyberspace. This issue has taken on greater salience due to the rise of social media and microblogging. So online threats is kind of a tricky area, but when you make a threat against someone else, particularly one that is potentially something you could carry out, that is something that is illegal and something that you could be prosecuted for. We find this in Facebook, Twitter, X, and YouTube. One example, Anthony Ellenis was arrested on December 28th, 2010, and charged with 5 counts of violating a federal anti-threat statute. Specifically, he was charged with threatening his ex-wife, co-workers, a kindergarten class, the local police, and an FBI agent. Ellenis had posted statements on his Facebook that appeared to threaten his ex-wife and other people in his life. Prior to this posting, his wife and family had left him, and he had lost his job in an amusement park. I know this is kind of a crazy story, isn't it? Shortly after this chain of events, Ellenis posted several statements on his Facebook page that were interpreted as threats. At his trial, he asked the court to dismiss the charges, stating that his Facebook comments were not true threats. He argued that he was an inspiring rap artist, and his comments were merely a form of artistic expression and a therapeutic release to help him deal with the events in his life. In an apparent attempt to underscore this, his comments should not be taken seriously. He posted links to YouTube videos that he parodied and noted that a popular rap artist often uses. This is not a threat. Ellenis was convicted of 4 or 5 counts. He was sentenced to 44 months imprisonment. So do you think this was a fair outcome of the trial? Do you think he was just trying to avoid prosecution, trying to avoid being found guilty of this by stating he was just a rap artist? Is it okay to, if you are just an artist, to say these sorts of things and to have actual threats that could be real? Free speech advocates expressed their serious reservations about this case and about the implications for people who post on Facebook. Those concerns become increasingly evident as the legal drama continued. So there are various petitions. His lawyers suggest that there was an impersonal nature of online communication, which makes such messages inherently susceptible to misinterpretation. So in other words, his lawyers were arguing that it was misinterpreted. And as you know, when you're getting a text from somebody and they say something on text, sometimes you interpret it wrong because you're not in person. You're just reading a text, you're not actually seeing it. So the lawyers were saying that this was a misinterpretation. Individually, I want everyone, okay, so if you think about it, okay, we won't do that. That's something in class. All right, so ultimately, Facebook, Twitter, even YouTube comments, any of those areas of social media where you might be interacting with other people, if you are presenting or accusing or debating with somebody, you have to be very careful so that they're not perceived as threats. Even if it seems like you're joking, you have to be very careful because sometimes people won't see it as a joke. And as to whether it should be prosecutable, I don't know. That's up to you. If you think it's something that is wrong, it should be prosecutable. That is something we are still working out as a society. We haven't really got there yet. Some countries have different ones. All right. Well, we won't go over the Chinese gamble. This is something about, just an extension of what we were talking about as far as how China is trying to block and just trying to censor a lot of content that's online. But that's all I have for this week. If you have any questions, I'm going to put post a quiz on there, and we're going to have a quiz this week. There's no due date, so don't worry about it. And I'll have a study guide with it. So I'll see you guys next week, and you guys have a good one.